Hi, everybody. My name is Gina, and thanks for joining us. I have my good friend Dona here. We are talking about the double whammy of ADHD and perimenopause and menopause. And hi, Dona. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Dona Bumgarner, and I am a marriage and family therapist trainee, which means I'm still in school. I'm almost done with my graduate degree. And prior to this, I was a life coach, and I worked with moms who were overwhelmed with parenting, which often meant they have ADHD as well. So I've been working in mental health support for quite some time.
Yeah, that's right. And we have both been diagnosed with ADHD, and we were just kind of chatting about that. I was diagnosed in 2021, and Dona, you said you were diagnosed in 2022.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we were also talking about how the diagnosis for women doubled from 2020 to 2022 because, everything just kind of fell apart and our whole structure fell apart. Is that when you started noticing it for yourself?
Definitely part of the journey for me. It's interesting because I did not think I had ADHD. I thought everybody else in my family of origin, and also my immediate family had ADHD. And, I was like the one who was keeping it all together. I was like the neurotypical with, all the brain function. And it was sort of like we were like dominoes. So like the pandemic happened, the lockdown happened. My daughter had been struggling in school, and daughter at that time, gender fluid now, but at that time was still identifying as female, and was struggling in school, and we could not figure out what was going on. We did several meetings with her teachers, just hadn't nailed it down yet. And then the lockdown happened.
Yeah.
And watching my kid try to be in school on video, it was so clear to me what was happening. Could not sit still, could not focus, kept wandering away. We also discovered that they have dyslexia. So that was another piece of it, was I could see that they weren't reading at, grade comprehension level. So we got my kids screened and diagnosed late in 2020. And then through a conversation in couples therapy my partner and I were having, where I was like, you can't remember anything. And our counselor said, have you ever been screened for ADHD? And so he did a screening, and my partner was like, yeah, I've wondered, but haven't ever been diagnosed. And so our therapist was like, yes, ADHD. So that's two of the three of us. And then as I was reading about ADHD in girls specifically, because, what I knew of ADHD was hyperactivity and outbursts. And, sometimes my kid is, runs like a motor, which is how they, just like the classical description. Sometimes they do that, but often it's not that. It's like, daydreaming, or just can't remember, or I give instructions and they can only remember one thing when I've said four things. So I started reading about ADHD in girls. And as I was reading that literature, I was like, oh, this is
This is me too.
this is me too. And I had been maybe my symptoms were subclinical, or maybe I had just learned to function. But when I was in school, the diagnosis profile of ADHD did not include what it includes now, which is inattentive and combined types. It was only the hyperactive. That was really kind of what was known, because that research is done on boys primarily. Right. So up until fairly recently, all of that diagnostic research is done on a very particular profile. Yeah. And that profile does not include most girls. And so if you look at the statistics of who has an ADHD diagnosis, when they were diagnosed, and what type they fall into, the inattentive type is primarily females, and the hyperactive type is primarily males. And even the combined type is much more male than female. So this sort of like inattentive ADHD was sort of unknown when I was a kid. And so I never got screened. I never, was never tested. And I did okay in life, but I was tired all the time. I mean, for probably 5 years before the pandemic, I was telling my doctors, like, "I am so tired. I don't know what's going on." And I was a stay-at-home parent. It wasn't like I was stressed out. Um, and it wasn't until the pandemic and staying home and losing all of my routine that I suddenly was like, "I cannot function anymore." So as I
Right.
started reading these articles and I was like, I think this might be me too."
Yeah.
And I pursued a diagnosis and got on medication, and it was like, I wasn't so tired anymore. My anxiety went down, my depression went down. All the things I'd been struggling with pretty much my whole life got
And I
better.
think it's really common. It sounds like, especially for females, we tend to focus on the comorbidity. For you, anxiety, depression. For me,
Yeah,
depression until I had a child, and then it became anxiety and depression. And
yeah,
those were the things I always focused on. I never thought ADHD. Now, I was the person who was, like making jokes. Oh, it's my ADD. Oh, it's my ADD. Never did I think that that was going to be a real diagnosis for me.
yeah,
It
yeah,
made absolute sense once I got the diagnosis and started looking into it. As we were talking, we were both kind of daydreamers when we were growing up,
yeah,
right? Just
yeah,
active imagination, thinking about all the fun, cool things in the daytime,
yeah.
not really present.
Yeah,
Uh,
looking out the window, thinking about other things. I mean, if you read back my, childhood, report cards, half of them say, "Don't use a daydreamer." And, it wasn't like I was failing classes, I was doing okay, but
yeah.
I knew that I was not doing as well as I could have, and I couldn't figure out why. And this
Yeah.
is also what the research shows is that when women are undiagnosed or missed because young girls don't present in this hyperactive way, so they're not sent for screening by their teachers because they're doing okay in school, the grades
Mhm.
are okay, so they don't get screened, they don't get diagnosed, and they don't get treatment of whatever kind that is, whether it's medication or therapeutic support, CBT, whatever.
Right.
Then they get into adulthood and they have probably developed some coping mechanisms that are a lot of work,
Right.
and they start presenting to their healthcare people with depression because they're exhausted, or anxiety because they're like, "Why can't I keep my life together?"
Mhm.
Um, and they tend to get treated for those things long before they get diagnosed with ADHD. So sometimes that takes years.
Right.
So, and that was my situation where nobody suggested ever, "Oh, you might have ADHD. We should check for that."
Right.
They were just like, "Here, take this antidepressant.
Yeah.
You'll feel
That
better."
happens today. I remember
Yeah.
going into my doctor before I decided to get on medication, and I said, I'm overwhelmed. I have all this stuff going on. Oh, you need to pull back. Oh, you need to do this. Oh, you
Yeah.
need to do that. I'm a very high functioning person. I like to do a lot of things. I enjoy that. But I've always been told in one way or another that you're trying not to focus on something, or you're overwhelming yourself. Like, it's just never a bigger conversation. It's always, oh, it's this, you need to
Yeah.
rest more.
Yeah,
Okay.
and some of that is because, the newest version of the DSM, the diagnostic, manual, the DSM-4 is the first one to talk about these 3 different kinds of ADHD, and that only came out in, I think, 2019.
Oh,
So,
wow.
before that, that
Wow.
wasn't even known, like, maybe there was some research about it, but people didn't really know, and even now, doctors, not psychiatrists, are pretty well educated, but, if you go to your GP and say, "I'm tired, I can't focus, da, 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 da," they may not recognize your symptoms as ADHD because this is not their specialty area.
Right.
They're gonna hear, I feel down a lot," and they're gonna say, "Oh, that sounds like depression." And they're
Yeah.
not gonna go through, the process of doing formal screening, assessments. They're not going, so they're gonna,
Yeah.
give you a pill that they think will help, and maybe it will a little bit, but it's frustrating because, I think as women, we kind of have to fight for good healthcare anyway, and this is just like another level of
Yeah.
we need to fight for it.
And I'm glad we're talking about it more. I was diagnosed through a neurologist. And did you go to a psychiatrist? How
I
did you
went to a psychiatrist, yeah, and it was a really, really difficult process. So I talked to my general practitioner.
Mhm.
who was willing to diagnose my kid, but was not willing to do an adult diagnosis because it's a little more subtle. So she recommended a couple of online places. And again, this was 2020. So, doctors were like way backlogged. Lots of people were doing stuff online. So she suggested a couple online places. And I went to, I don't even remember the name of it. I went to one place that had like an online assessment,
Mhm.
which now that I'm in grad school for therapy, I'm like, yikes, that's not how you do an assessment. But I didn't know at the time. So I did this online assessment and it sort of came back as inconclusive. Please see a doctor. And I was like, but who am I going to see? And I called around to find psychiatrists, which I knew were desperately backed up and long wait lists.
Yeah.
And mostly what I found was psychiatrists who would be happy to do medication management for me, but weren't doing any diagnosis.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was really frustrating.
Wow.
And so eventually I found someone in a Facebook group who said, and here's the other complicated thing is you have to see a practitioner in your own state, right? So someone might say, oh, I found a practitioner online. They're great. They're in, Wisconsin, and I'm in California. I can't see them. So
Right.
eventually online, I connected with someone who was in California and who had found a telehealth psychiatrist who did an assessment and was doing meds management for her, and she liked her. And so I
Mhm.
looked them up, and amazingly, they took our insurance even. And so I've been working with that psychiatrist for quite some time now, and she's
Mhm.
great. Um, but the rules have changed since 2022 to
Yeah.
now. So there have been times where she's like, I don't know if you can keep seeing me. You might have to come to my office. She's in LA. I'm not in LA. So there's been these periods where I'm like, am I going to lose my support because
Yeah.
the laws keep changing,
Right. And how was the assessment online, the one that you initially took versus the one she gave you? Was it way more extensive?
Um, the one that I did online felt very tilted towards hyperactivity. It was asking about, do you interrupt people when you're talking? Do you have a hard time sitting still? I don't remember all the questions, but as I was reading it, I was like, this is not the type I have. Like I
Yeah.
had learned enough at that point. Like I had done enough reading that I was like, this is that other kind of ADHD, not the one I have. And this is why I keep getting missed. And I think that's why it came back as inconclusive.
Yeah.
Because even though I was a little bit gaming the assessment because I knew that it wasn't asking me about the right symptoms,
Yeah.
it uh, and then when I met with my doctor, she asked me some of the same questions, but she also asked much more about my childhood. Like what was I like in childhood? You know, what was my school experience? What did my teachers say about me?
Yeah.
Um, and so that was interesting because that online assessment hadn't really asked those questions. And
Mhm.
in fact, the formal diagnosis requires that you have both current symptomology and childhood symptomology.
Sure.
Um, and I don't know, there's a little bit of controversy out in the scientific world right now about that. Like, can you have adult onset ADHD, or is it just missed ADHD that, like it's a lifelong thing, and then maybe you have lower symptomology, or you reach a point in your life where it gets worse,
Mhm.
or your circumstances make it harder.
Now, let's just fast forward to today. So you get the diagnosis, Donia. How has it changed for you? Like what are the pros for you now? Like getting the diagnosis, how did that help you besides the medication? Just
Yeah.
having the understanding of what you've been challenged with this whole time.
Yeah, it was a really interesting process. And because my partner and I were diagnosed fairly close to the same time, he was about 6 months before me, we talked a lot about if I had known, what
Mhm.
would my life be like now?
Oh,
And I think that both of us went through a real grieving process about that because both of us had, you know, desire to go to college and grad school when we were younger,
yeah.
and school was just too hard. Like we
Mhm.
just didn't have the confidence that we could get through the kinds of degrees. Like he wanted to get a science degree and I wanted to get like, a master's in art history. And I was like, I can't remember stuff to take a test. And
Right.
so we both got through college and we both had degrees and had careers, but we both recognized that we had in some ways like taken the easy route through college and
Sure.
taken the easy route in high school. Like we didn't take all the hard classes and we weren't qualified to get to the 4-year school we really wanted to go to or get the financial aid we really wanted to go to because our grades were kind of okay,
Yeah.
And so we went through this whole process of like, if I had known this and if I had gotten support, I might be a totally different person now.
Sure.
And it's not that we don't love our lives or the lessons that we've learned doing it the hard way, but we've been living life on hard, right? And there are things that we could have done differently. And that's taken some time to make peace with.
Yeah.
Um,
And I don't know, I think grieving goes on and on and on forever, right? It's like layers of onion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why you went into therapy and counseling because you were able to access your grief. We've talked about this when we got diagnosed. I did the opposite, which is very true to my personality. I was like, let's solve it. All right, got the diagnosis. I'm stoked. Let's figure out what we need to do next. How am I going to put tools in my toolbox? I'm just now thinking about the grief process of it all. And it's taken me, so I was diagnosed in 2021. It's taken
3 years,
to start to unlayer the grief of it.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating journey how we both kind of attacked it for sure.
Yeah.
So
and I think that says a lot about our two personalities, right? I mean, you're definitely like the attacker, and I'm like, I need to process this.
So because you remind me that there is grief to this.
Yeah.
That is really, really true. And it hits people in different ways.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure all of our listeners know that, like, it can be exciting for some people to get that diagnosis. You still got to deal with the grief later, or you deal with the grief right away, which I see a lot. And then you kind of step into your power of it all. And
and some of that process too was looking back on my life and like, why was I successful in the places where I was successful? And why were other things hard? And so that was a really interesting process too, because I had an 11-year career at Apple.
Yeah.
And on the surface, you would think like that would be really hard to do with ADHD. But in reality, working in tech moves really fast.
Yeah.
And the kind of position I had, I was moving from thing to thing to thing, and I never had time to get bored. So that was a perfect job for me.
That's right.
But I wouldn't have guessed, like that was sort of an accident that I ended up there. But now that I know this about my brain, I can be more strategic in terms of, okay, well, what do I want in my life going forward? What's working for me? What isn't? What things are super hard? And is it worth it to fight for that? And what things are more in my comfort zone? And, as I'm changing careers right now, I'm thinking about that a lot. Like, what kind of therapist do I want to be? What kind of environment do I want to work in? And last year for my internship, I have to do a year of internship as part of my program. I worked in a high school that was basically counseling triage. And it was amazing for me. It was perfect for me. But for other therapists, that would be, the worst situation. But that's because that's how my brain works. And so I could see that as I was in it, like, this is great for me.
Yeah. And I see that with entrepreneurship for me. I have to wear 50 different hats every day. I love that part of it because I'm not bored, because that boredom thing is real with ADHD. And you see it in kids. You see them turn off once they get bored. I've talked to people who've said, oh man, with high IQs that say, I did excellent at my AP, history classes, but man, give me math, got an F.
Boring. Yeah.
Right. So it's so fast. If you get an early diagnosis with your child, man, you can change their whole path and how they think about things.
Yeah. And I'm really seeing that with my kid, that although, I thought we were hesitant to tell Star that they had ADHD because we were worried that it was going to be
The label.
a label, right? Yeah. And instead, it has been this very empowering thing for them,
Yeah.
And once in a while, they use it as an excuse, like, oh, I have ADHD. I can't remember how to do my chores. But
That's because they are smart.
but most of the time, they really lean into the knowledge that certain things are really easy for them
Yeah.
and other things take more support.
Yeah.
And, they're only 13. So, they're still learning how to build their own scaffolding in ways, but
Yeah.
they get that it's necessary, and they are totally open to it, and they see ADHD as a superpower. You hear people talk about ADHD as a superpower. They really see that.
Yeah. And I
And I
agree
think
with
that's
it.
amazing.
I really see it as a superpower too. And getting into ADHD coaching it's a joy, and also it's a privilege, but also it's watching people, because there's a scale, right?
Yeah.
You've got this whole scale of ADHD, and it presents so differently with each person. So
Yeah.
let's jump into the menopause piece of this,
Yes.
because we're both in our 50s.
Yeah.
I, of course, because you know me, had to take a little bit of the hard road. I was like, oh, I'm diagnosed. Now I'm going to go work with an ADHD coach and figure out where all of my problems are. Tools in the toolbox, and I will figure it out that way. I was doing that until menopause. And then one day, literally, I could not complete sentences, and I could not remember words that were very easy words. And it really made me nervous. And I thought, wow, is this menopause? Like, is this what I'm going to be experiencing for 5-10 years? And I started to do some research, and I found out, ADHD and menopause, it like highlights every issue you might have and make it worse. Is that what happened for you too?
For me, I think, so I haven't hit full menopause yet. I think I'm still in the perimenopause phase, although I'm going to be there anytime. Anytime.
I will welcome you with open arms.
And my symptomology for perimenopause has not been severe. So like, I know people who have, my very, very close friend of mine who I think we talked over brunch one day about this stuff, is like her anxiety was like crazy intense. Depression was crazy intense.
Wow.
Sex drive like went in the tank, couldn't sleep, hot flash, like she had all of these symptoms, poor thing. And I haven't had that experience. So although we were talking about this before we started recording, I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 48. And during my chemotherapy period, which was like a 6 months period, also there's no, I'm going to talk about how there's not a lot of science on menopause and ADHD, but also there's not a lot of science on women who are pre-menopause and have breast cancer and what chemotherapy does to your reproductive system. So no real science, but they suggested that I go on a drug that would stop my ovulation cycle so that it would protect that system from the chemotherapy. So they put me into chemical menopause for 6 months, which was super intense. And yes, I had all of the symptoms, but then I came back out of it and started my cycle again.
Okay.
So I don't know if that has impacted, what's happened since then. But anyway, all that to say, I haven't had a lot of symptoms of perimenopause. So I did not sort of clue into ADHD might be getting worse because of estrogen changes.
Yeah.
And also, I've been doing deep dive research into this recently. There is almost no science on this. There's like, I've been like, as recently as like 2019, the scientists were saying, we don't really know why ADHD gets worse. And then there's studies that came out in like 2023 and this year, 2024, that are like, we're starting to see a connection. Both with this monthly cycle, like women are finding that the week before their period, which is when estrogen drops, their medication doesn't work very well. They lose words, just like you're describing, like they lose words. They are disorganized. They lose track of time, all of those things. And they're like, "I'm getting treatment. I've been fine. Why is it sudden like, why is this 1 week so hard?"
Yeah.
Um, and so what scientists are starting to recognize is it's that estrogen drop that's causing it,
Mhm.
and so that's what's happening in perimenopause is you start going, where estrogen is like this, a little
Yeah,
dip that 1 week. When you're in perimenopause, it starts to go like this.
the
And
roller
then, of course, when you
coaster.
hit menopause, it's gone, right?
Yeah, that's
So
right. That's right.
yeah, and so the tiny little that I've one study I have read that said that actually at the point of menopause, when you're fully into menopause, which means like no period for a year is basically that
Mhm.
definition, the symptoms actually get better. So you don't get as impacted with the ADHD symptoms after you're fully into menopause, which is interesting because your estrogen's low at that point. But there's
Yeah,
something about the up and down that's really a problem.
I can see that, and I've been going so I think I started perimenopause probably in 2017,
Yeah.
and I think I fully went into it last year, and, that for me, that's when my sentence structure started to change, and it was
Yeah.
like, beep, boop, beep, boop, like, I did not know what was going on with my brain. I
Yeah.
got
And
onto
it can be scary because it feels like dementia. It feels like what is
Yes,
going on?
yes, and we can get into that on another call, but that stuff always makes me very fearful. And so I thought, oh my gosh, is this happening? I'm 50. Is this what's going on now? But I went and I just followed my intuition and I got on ADHD medication. And
Yeah.
it was within a week, it changed
Yeah.
it was gone.
Yeah.
And it blew me away how fast it worked. And it made me realize how much I needed it. And
Yeah.
I was like that person taking the hard road. Oh, I don't want to do it. I'm going to do
Because
this.
we've been doing it our whole lives, right?
Yes,
We've been
and
working
I'm
so
not
hard our whole
promoting
lives.
medication for everyone. I've talked to people who use natural stuff that works really well for them. So I'm not saying
Yeah.
everyone should do this, but trust your gut because I did it and it was a game changer. And I thought, oh, this is so
Yeah.
much easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's still hard, but it's so much easier.
It's so much
And
easier.
especially in menopause, it's been so helpful. And I'm really glad that I trusted myself. I'm so sad that there's still no scientific data out there. On menopause, really, there's not a ton. On ADHD and menopause, I mean,
There's
women are
always
just left out. We're just left
yeah.
out of all
Yeah.
the data, which I hope
Yeah.
that's starting to change.
I think it is starting to change, although honestly, I've in the last week or so, because I'm working on a school project on this topic, I have read probably 20 research, sort of around this topic. So about menopause and the symptoms and about ADHD and late diagnosis, and then also about ADHD and menopause. And there are basically 3 people who are doing this research right now. So obviously that's going to grow because there's really something here, but it's it's just such a small group of people and they're 2 of them are in Europe,
Of
So
course.
yeah, so and that's the other thing, like if there are people listening to this show and you're not in menopause yet, but you are having this like week before your period or the week before and part of your period with all these strong symptoms,
Yeah.
what folks are doing in Europe and starting to do, I've talked to some psychiatrists here that are doing this too, that they can adjust your medication. So they can like bump your medication dosage up that week. And
Yeah.
that really helps. And then you
Right.
get back to the baseline medication. So, you know, I don't know how many people know about that, but
No. I
it
Yeah.
might be helpful if I send you these articles I'm reading that you can share with your
Yeah,
listeners
I
if they
will.
need to take them to their doctors and say,
Yeah.
hey, read this.
Yeah, and I will link this. I will link this. Your articles and everything we've read, I'll link it to the show.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just curious, like what with everything that's gone on since 2020, your diagnosis, your family's diagnosis, recognizing some perimenopause stuff, what have you learned about yourself and what are the tips you can share with other people?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is I think I trust myself more because I think for most of my life, I really had fallen into this very common place where women who are undiagnosed think everybody else is doing something that I somehow didn't like. I didn't get the manual to life, right? Like somehow everybody else has this figured out and I don't. I had been feeling for so long that I had something, like something was not right. And
Right.
I think you really have to trust that intuition. That's really the thing that I've learned. Um, and so
Yeah.
since then, it's been that intuition has led me to get treatment for seasonal depression, which I've also had my whole life and have never really managed well. Um,
Mhm.
so this last year I got on the right meds finally, and I had the best winter I've ever had.
That's amazing. And I think so many people, especially us females, are just told, "Oh, you're fine. You're making it up." Or,
Yeah,
"Oh, maybe it's this, or maybe it's that." Trusting your
yeah,
gut, your intuition is the best thing you can do.
yeah.
For me, when I started feeling perimenopausal, I started talking to women in my life who are in their 70s, who already dealt with it, who are
Mm,
badass
mhm.
women. And I was like, "What's your advice?" And I will
Yeah,
tell you the two things they told me was, get your blood work done every year. And if you fall into the sliding scale, know that that is just a sliding scale and it might not pertain to you. If
mhm.
you're on the bottom of the scale, that might be really bad for you.
Right.
And I
Yeah, that's a really good point.
never said that to me. And I was like, and that's why I got on estrogen, because I was like pretty low in the sliding scale. But my male doctor was like, "Oh, but you're in the scale, you're fine." And
Mhm.
finally, through my friend's advice, I demanded to be on it. Now I have a great OBGYN, so I just kind of went to her and said, "Can I get on
Yeah,
it?" She said,
yeah,
"Yes." Got on the patch. I know it's not for everybody, but it was a lifesaver for me.
yeah.
And the other thing too is cut out the cardio and start weightlifting, right? I
Yeah,
was
see, I
like,
haven't done that yet.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
like the thing that I'm like, I have to switch because I'm so used to being like, oh, the workout needs to be so hard. It
yeah,
needs
gotta burn the calories.
you can just do 30 minutes of weight training or
Yeah,
15 minutes of weight training, and that's all you need. You're
yeah,
okay. Go on a
yeah,
walk and do that. So
yeah, yeah.
it's been a mind
What a
shift.
relief, right? To think it can be that easy.
Oh my God. We're so extreme, especially in
Yeah,
America. Like you got to do this extreme
yeah,
approach to everything.
yeah.
Um,
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking of one other thing that's really shifted for me is
yeah.
that I believe that more now that I can do hard things, which is why I'm in grad school now.
Yes, you
You know,
can.
I think that
Yes.
so much of my life I was like, "Oh, that's gonna be really hard for me," and then I would choose the easy path like I was talking about in school. And now I'm
Yeah.
like, I just need to figure out how to do it, not I can't do it, right?
That's
So, and
right.
that's been a huge shift for me too.
And what a lesson to pass on to your child.
Yeah,
Right? That lesson you never got. Now you get to
yeah,
pass that on, and I get to
right.
pass it on, and
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's just so good. And girl, you went back to school in your 50s, okay?
Yeah, I started grad school when I was 50.
I love it.
And
Glad
let
you
me
did
tell you,
that.
I'm tired, but I also have a 4.0 GPA, so there you go.
That's right, girl. Yeah. I love that for you. And I'm excited. And when do you get to see? I mean, you're seeing clients now. You're seeing patients now, right?
Yeah, I see clients now, as an intern, a trainee, basically. So I work there's some rules about what I can do as a student. So I can only work in a nonprofit or a federally state or county funded agency. So I can work in basically clinical mental health, which means I can work in a school or I can work in a, you know, local county agency, or I can work in a nonprofit, which I'm doing now for a telehealth position. Um, and then once I graduate in December, I'll apply for my associate license, and then I can work with anybody. I just need to.
Much for Yeah, thank you so much for joining me on this topic. We are going to do this again because this topic needs to be we need to keep talking about it and
Yeah,
exploring it. And women need to hear about this, right? So we're not
yeah,
crazy.
for sure.
Follow your gut and
Yeah,
advocate for
and if
yourself.
you're, between 40 and 60, you might be
Yeah.
having other things going on.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Donya.
Thank you, Gina. So fun.